can open it up for Q&A. So based on when, I decided to talk today, it was about 2 hours ago. So I did put together a couple slides to talk through like getting into penetration testing and some thoughts on that for people that are looking to get into penetration testing, or just the experiences that I've had with, not only myself getting into it, but then also kind of mentoring people that have wanted to get into it, and now being on the other side and actually interviewing people that are trying to become pen testers. So I do have some slides about that, but I guess before we get into all that, does anybody want to throw out some questions or any particular topics of interest? I'd be happy to blabber on about whatever you guys are most interested in.
I have a question.
Yeah.
How do you deal with burnout?
That is a great question. Let's see. How do I personally deal with burnout? I have the mentality where it hasn't been a huge issue in my life. And I know that's not the case for everybody. So I'm a little bit unique in that way. I really enjoy working and the work that I get to do. So it doesn't feel like I'm ever burning out. I'll get stressed out and I'll have certain periods. Like there's definitely, ups and downs in work cycle when you're doing consultation and working with a lot of different customers. But I try and unplug. I try and do other things. I think that's probably the most common answer. I don't think there's any, secret sauce there. But the hard part about burnout, I think, and why everybody talks about it for penetration testers in particular, is just that there is constantly stuff that we have to do. And I don't mean just from a day-to-day, like keeping up with projects. That's one thing, and that certainly does get busy, and people try and squeeze as much work as they can out of their penetration testers. But there's always research to be done. There's always learning to be done. There's always, if you're in this industry, you want to learn new techniques. You want to, kind of practice new techniques. You want to research and understand more about what we're doing. And it's a super broad field. You say penetration tester, and I could be talking about, network-based attacks. I could be talking about wireless networks. I could be talking about web applications, physically breaking into buildings. I mean, there's always something new to learn about. So I think that's why people struggle with it so much. What have you guys heard about this, or what has been your experience with burnout and things like that around the penetration testing community?
Well, for me, I've had to literally step away from computers for a while. Uh,
Yeah.
I don't know what it is exactly, but like for example, I love gaming. I have like 600 games on Steam, but for some reason, after let's say a really hard week at work, and I'm doing like an internal and social engineering and all this other crap, and trying to get all these docs in time, and then all I want to do honestly is just like not be around technology for about a nice 2 to 3 days.
Yeah.
So I'm just kind of curious as to how others, deal with it. Is it something that you look at from a standpoint of, okay, I need to do something drastically different, like, I don't know, play the banjo or whatever, or, do I kind of just buckle down, especially if let's say have like an outstanding certificate that you want to take, right?
Mhm.
Because I recently tried to take the OSCE and I missed it by this much.
Yeah.
And honestly, like for 2 days after that, and I couldn't be around computers. I was like, I just want to get drunk and watch Rick and Morty for like 48 hours.
Yeah, no, I mean that's all good points, and I recently just kind of went through the same thing with OSWE, and just preparing for that certificate on top of all the work and stuff like that, it's overwhelming. I've got kids, I've got a wife. You can see in one corner behind me there's a Peloton, so I try and do something active every day. That helps to kind of get me away from the screen. Otherwise, I do kind of get sucked in. I like video games too, so this chair has my attention a lot of the day. I guess I find that it doesn't really bother me from a computer perspective. Like I use video games to unplug, because I don't particularly care for watching TV or movies as much. I like to interact and kind of do something. So, I'll grab a glass of bourbon or something. I will sit down, play video games, kind of just shut down and not talk to anybody. For me, I get the most burnt out when I have to do a lot of consulting or a lot of talking with clients. If I have a day where I'm just doing all calls, I just want to come home and curl up in a little ball and put my headphones on at my computer. but that's different for everybody. And so your personality type definitely makes a difference when you get into pen testing or security in general, because for that exact reason. I mean, I know a lot of folks that are in the same boat as you and just want to, go off the grid after a week of work and go camping for the weekend and not touch an electronic. I haven't experienced that, but I know a lot of folks have. So it's definitely a significant issue. The last thing I'll kind of say on this is, from our perspective as employers. So, for just brief background, so I'm one of the co-founders of Traxium Security, and so we do penetration testing, security consulting, all those things. But one of the things that we really try and focus on is work-life balance and trying to avoid burnout and things like that. So we'll try and break away and do, lunches during the week, during the day, just so we can all unplug, step outside, and kind of talk about something else. We will try and, in the afternoons or something, we'll play Tony Hawk in the office and just try and chill out and not think about stuff for a little bit. And I think it's just a constant battle of doing that and trying to separate work or kind of have those moments where you're working hard, but then being able to unplug and do something else. But it's different for everybody. Your mileage may vary.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, no worries. Any other questions or topics that are top of mind for you guys?
So can I say something about the burnout? I know I'm not in penetration testing yet, but I do software development, and I spend a large portion of my day at the computer, and there's a lot of times I'll get burned out with the program I'm working on, or whatever. But the computer for me is like, I have a hard time stepping away from it. So the way I kind of deal with it is actually just having different different interests to go explore on the computer. I might not I might be burned out doing programming. Maybe I'll go do some Hack the Box, or do something slightly different. Maybe I'll work on some video editing, stuff like that, and that usually helps me a lot.
Yeah, 100%. And in my background is as a software developer too. So that was what I did for a long time before I got into security. And that job burned me out a whole heck of a lot more than penetration testing ever did. Working on the same applications day in and day out and trying to do new things and new features, but you're still working with the same code, same tool set. That to me was a lot worse for my personality than penetration testing and consulting, in the sense where I get to do new projects, I get to do different things, I get to work with different environments, different customers. So that does help keep it fresh for me, but it's tough.
Yeah, I get that exactly. Yeah, I'm working on a program at work now that I've been working on for like the last 5 years, and I'm just so sick of that program.
Yeah, that's really what pushed me out of software development. I mean, I didn't mind it so much. I do still enjoy like writing scripts and stuff, but I like that to be a piece of my day, not the whole day.
Yeah, I've recently taken up just doing personal projects on the side, relatively quick personal projects that I can be done and over with, and I don't have to keep messing with them, because I find those whole lot more enjoyable than spending years on the same thing.
For sure. Any other questions or topics, guys?
We had one question someone sent me on Discord. I don't know if anyone can just jump on and ask questions, but if you want to relay your questions to me, I'll pass those over to JR. One of them was, so we've all heard that OSCP doesn't get you ready for real world pen testing, but with that said, are there attacks or techniques that we would be expected to learn the first few months that aren't covered by, some Cyber Mentor stuff or other courses like eLearn Security or OSCP, things of that nature?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's broad. So there's a lot that kind of goes into that. Let me switch over. I've got some slides. So let me just go off these really horrible meme slides here. And let's talk a little bit about like getting into penetration testing. So I think this whole conversation as a whole will kind of help answer some of that. And if it doesn't, then we'll come back to that question as we're going through. Let me try and share my screen here. All right, can you guys see that?
Yep.
Cool. So, trying to come up with a topic last minute here and trying to find something to talk about that is, relevant. And I know not everybody on the call is trying to get into penetration testing. Some of you already are. Some of you have no interest of getting into penetration testing. I think a lot of the skills and the stuff that kind of comes along with this, though, is useful to understand. And for those of you that are thinking about getting into it, it's useful to kind of understand what day-to-day life is like and what people are actually looking for when we're trying to get people into this industry. It's gotten so much hype. I think it's gotten so much hype that everybody thinks they want to be a penetration tester and that penetration testing is great. And for the most part it is, but it's not for everybody. Just like the burnout conversation, there are some people that really struggle with this type of cadence. There's a lot of people that struggle with this type of job as compared to, being a SOC analyst or something. So it helps to understand what you're getting yourself into and kind of what can make you successful in this field. So I threw together some slides. They're, quick, easy. There's going to be nothing fancy here. It's meme heavy. So let's just kind of jump into it. Just so you understand my background and where I'm coming from this conversation. So as I mentioned, I can only speak to kind of my experiences and what I've seen. There's a lot of different experiences and a lot of different ways to handle a lot of these same questions. So I think that's why it's helpful to kind of have this conversation at regular intervals. I think that's part of it. Ultimately, my background, as I mentioned, so I was a full stack developer for a government contractor for a while before I made the move to private sector. I was supporting the Air Force, developing applications that were used for test and evaluation. And during my time there, I was also kind of converted over to a cybersecurity analyst for projects. So from that cybersecurity analyst position, then I kind of made the jump to private sector, and I've been a penetration tester and security consultant ever since. So I've got a lot of certifications and stuff, and I'm a fan of certifications because I enjoy learning things. I don't think they're the end all be all. I think it's a good way of demonstrating knowledge for certain areas. And so we'll get into a little bit more of that. And then besides that, of course, being a penetration tester, you gotta love CTFs. I feel like I love CTFs. Dad and husband, so that takes up a lot of time. Kind of helps with the burnout, I guess, because that also burns you out in a different way. And then bourbon enthusiast. So got some Widow Jane I'm sipping on right now. So I want to cover a couple things. This isn't going to be super long, short and sweet, but what's it like to be a penetration tester, first of all? Maybe give you guys a little bit of the flavor, maybe if you don't know, or if you're curious of kind of what day-to-day life is like, and then how to prepare for a career in penetration testing. So talking about what you can do now to help you make the jump into the career if it's something you decide to go with. And then lastly, I want to touch a little bit on interviews because that's something I've had to deal with a lot more recently. And so I think it might be helpful to kind of make sure everybody is on the same page about what interviews are expecting from you, interviewers are expecting from you, and how you can better, ace those interviews when you do get them. And feel free to interrupt me at any point during this. Raise your hand, throw it in chat. Just jump in and talk over me. It's perfectly fine. So rather this be conversational. So what is it like being a pen tester? A day in the life. So we get to hack things and we get paid to do it, right? So why wouldn't you want to do that? That's what everybody sees, and that's what they gravitate towards, is the ability to do these CTF scenarios, but in real life. You get to, as a penetration testing consultant, you get to work with a ton of different companies, do a ton of different types of penetration testing usually. So where's the drawback? You get to see different things every day, do and learn different types of testing, work with different organizations. In the past month, I've worked with everything from like healthcare organizations to retail organizations, technology providers, startups. I've done PCI QSA consulting work for a payment processor. I mean, there's just, it's always different every day, and I do enjoy that. I think it keeps it fresh and it keeps it interesting. So you're kind of all over the place. But I think that's why people get the view that this is kind of the rock star area of security. Now, I don't necessarily agree with it that it's the rock star. It's for some people, it's a perfect fit. If you have the right personality, if you love a lot of these things, then maybe it's right for you. But ultimately, much more than just being able to hack every day, it comes down to a lot more of my time is spent doing other things. So research. I mean, you have to be able to want to learn and understand things that you don't. We're considered to be an expert, so we have to at least, be knowledgeable in a lot of different areas, really have a wide breadth of knowledge, and be an expert in as many of those areas as possible for most people. In addition to just learning what we're talking about. So, you can't just take a vulnerability scan result like IKE aggressive mode. I don't know. So maybe a IPsec VPN endpoint has IKE aggressive mode enabled, and you're going to spit that out and put it into a report. Well, that's great, but if you're reporting it, you're expected to be able to understand the vulnerability, what's the risk, what's the impact, and be able to speak about it. And you'll collect that knowledge over time. Nobody's going to expect you to do that on day one, but it's a lot of work to go in and research those areas and understand those things that you may not be familiar with jumping in. In addition to just the general knowledge areas, you have to continually learn and improve your TTPs. So whatever this stands for, it's a military acronym, but technology, tactics, and procedures, I think, or something like that. Schmitty, I probably bastardized that, but whatever. But the idea here is that there's always new tools, there's always new techniques, there's always new things to learn to sharpen your sword and improve your toolkit so you can be a better penetration tester or a better consultant. I can think one of the things I've had to learn more about over the past 2 years than anything else is probably cloud-based technology, understanding things like containerization and cloud configuration and what that means from a penetration testing perspective and how that all kind of fits together. That's just one example, but even new tool sets, IPv6, man in the middle 6 is fairly new as that goes. Really powerful tool though. So you have to learn and understand to be able to report that to people of why, disabling IPv6 may be the right move in order to prevent somebody on your internal network from being able to harvest credentials or being able to man in the middle of your traffic. There's a lot of stuff that goes into that. And then, of course, the thing that everybody's going to talk about is reports and docs. Like you have to be okay writing a report. You have to be okay documenting everything as you go in as detailed a manner as possible. And not just like externally facing docs. You have to create your own internal docs. You have to create things like, KB articles, knowledge base articles, so you can go back and remember how to do certain techniques. You have to be able to document and show your work. So if you need to go back and validate a finding, you know how to recreate it. There's a lot of things that just writing reports is one thing, but being able to write an effective report and being able to take effective notes to make that reporting process easier, that's certainly a learned skill. And if you're not good at it, then you're probably going to hate the reporting process and hate documents even more. And then another thing, as I mentioned, one of the things that burns me out the most personally is the number of calls and presentations we have to do. So constantly having to talk to customers, either to explain issues, to talk through maybe challenges they're running into or how to fix a particular problem, present findings to them, presenting to maybe a web developer for how to fix a vulnerability in a website. And then maybe the next day you're presenting to an executive level board that literally doesn't know anything about security, but you have to explain the results of a penetration test to them. And turning that on and off can be extremely difficult and taxing for people. Any questions there? Any thoughts on kind of what that looks like from a pen testing perspective day to day?
I just wanted to add to that the soft skills, the people skills also matter a lot in this field because as you said, we have many calls and presentations, and if you don't know how to talk to certain people, it can't bite you in the ass. I've seen a couple of pen testers that, they just aren't comfortable doing presentations and have to have somebody else do it for them, and that's fine, but it's something that's very limiting, unfortunately, so, and I went to business school. I had to learn how to do public speaking because, you put me in front of people and I would just,
Yep.
It's just a thing that you learn over time, and unfortunately, one of those things that gets easier the more you do it. But I just wanted to emphasize that for the people who are wanting to break into the field, that this is something that you're going to have to both do and get good at, because and also improvisation, I think, is another aspect for calls and presentations, because I was actually talking to a red teamer last night who was telling me that he knew the answers to like a bunch of questions that he was asked for over like 20 minutes of Q&A. He knew the answers to all these questions, but there's that moment in time when your mind just goes blank, and you're like, oh God, hold on, I know the answer, just give me a
Yeah.
second, right?
Yeah.
So you have to learn how to deal with those kind of little glitches
Oh yeah.
in thinking, and trying to remember how to pull the answer out of your ass at the last minute and not sound like you're totally full of it.
Yeah, no, I would 100% agree with everything you just said. That's a super important part. And I would say a lot of times to be like a really great consultant or a really great penetration tester, I would argue it's the most important part. You can learn new tools and you can learn technical skills, but if you're not able to explain to people what you're doing or why they should care, you're going to have an uphill battle. I've worked with a lot of penetration testers in the past that have been the same way as what you're describing. So either just not good presentation skills and something that they really struggle with, or not great improvisation skills, so they actually get themselves in more trouble when they're trying to answer a question that they don't really know the answer to, or maybe they just can't remember the answer to it right then, even though they do know it. So yeah, I would 100% agree with that. You're going to be extremely limited, and most organizations are probably going to be very hesitant to hire you as a penetration tester, even if you don't have those soft skills. And I'll kind of touch on that a little bit more in the next section of how to prepare yourself. But yeah, I think they're absolutely critical. For me as a hiring person, and trying to get penetration testers and consultants in the door, I would argue that that's one of the most critical boxes to check, is being able to communicate both written and verbally in an effective manner.
And this is Matt. I just want to jump in real quick and say, like, yeah, like that's all incredibly accurate. And like, if you're not comfortable speaking in front of other people, you might have to come to terms with that, because if you want to do this and you want to do penetration tests, you'll have to present it, obviously, like we've just talked about. But to also not completely scare people, because there's going to be a time where you're going to be taking the reins on report and talking about it. Fortunately, most companies, you should have a little bit of backup on the call with you, so to not scare people off too much. If you do have one of those brain fart moments where you're not remembering something, hopefully you'll have someone like JR who can speak on that and expand on it. But
Yeah.
That's obviously not a crutch that you should rely on. It's just a nice little I guess safety float there. But
Yeah.
That's I still am working on this to get better with presenting and speaking on things, at an expert level, I guess. But it's always good to know that you have a little bit of backup. But so, not to scare people away too much, but you have to come to terms with, you'll have to be speaking in front of people and knowing what you're talking about.
Yeah, no, that's a really good point, Matt, too. And of course, from our perspective, we want everybody to be successful, and we want you to be able to get better at public speaking for anybody we're working with. And so, yeah, we're not just going to throw you out to the wolves, and most organizations aren't going to do that. Most good organizations, I guess I should say. They're not going to throw you to the wolves and just expect you to, day one, be a rock star and be able to handle all these different types of questions and stuff. But it is a skill you have to focus on. And it's something that does take practice. Growing up, I was never a public speaker. I hated giving any kind of presentation in school. I hated talking to people in general. I was a computer nerd, and I was not comfortable talking to other people, even if I felt like I comfortably knew a topic or I understood it. And so over the years, though, that's something that's just kind of gone away, and I figured out how to kind of do it, how to be more comfortable and understand the situation. So I focus a lot on when I'm speaking, I focus a lot on empathy and trying to read the room and understand whether people are on the same page as me, kind of what they're feeling or how they're receiving the results. And that allows me to kind of hack my presentation, I'll say, and use a little bit more psychology and maybe how I'm delivering results or how I'm answering questions. You know, a lot of things that we talk about as penetration testers when we're delivering news, when we're doing presentations, when we're explaining vulnerabilities, we have to be very doctor-like. We have to have bedside manner in how we portray that information. And so even some of the best presenters that I know don't have adequate bedside manner, I'll call it. And it really does hurt how their presentations are received, I think. And so what I mean by this is if I'm telling you your baby's ugly, right? So I'm talking to a development team that spent 2 years developing an app and I've just destroyed the underlying architecture from a security perspective. They're not going to be really happy about that in most cases. Now, they may be appreciative of it and they may be thankful that they know it now, but they're still not necessarily going to be like doing a happy dance and spiking the football. You know what I mean? So I have to understand that the message I'm delivering is important, their application is sick or their application needs fixing, and why that's the case, why it's important, without saying that they have failed or they've done a bad job or this is the worst thing I've ever seen. I've listened to presentations where somebody has literally said to a client, this is one of the worst networks I've ever seen from a security perspective, and nobody wants to hear that, even if it's true. You have to really temper the way that you're delivering these projects, and it all comes down to those communication skills, the empathy that you're able to show, and the ability to kind of read the room and answer questions in a way that's appropriate. I think that all comes into with maturity. And again, as Matt mentioned, you're not going to be just thrown out there and expected to do that day one. But if you practice this skill, if you know before you even get into penetration testing that you're going to struggle with this, then take some time. Present here at GCS. That's going to be something that at least moves you in the right direction. Small room of folks that you can deliver. That's very non-threatening environment. Then you can move to like virtual cons. Maybe a B-side Charlotte or a Carolina con that is going to be virtual, and they're, I think, desperate for papers. So that would be a great place to do it as well. Learning and building on those experiences, and then doing it in a way that you get better over time, and it just takes experience and it takes time, and you can always rely on other folks or other pen testers to help you through that, to help you during your actual presentations. They got your back. I've had periods of time where I just absolutely completely blanked during a pen test, during a deliverable report, and I had to have another pen tester jump in and kind of answer the question for me because I just couldn't process the words for whatever reason. So it happens to everyone. It's just a matter of getting past that and making that a random occurrence rather than the norm.
I also want to mention, as far as bedside manner goes, like when the pen testers are focused on security, right? When my bosses are telling me to do something, to make some program, honestly, they don't care about security. Like I've mentioned it to them before, and they just don't care. So there's a lot of, I think there's a lot of that you have to take into consideration also, that not everybody is as focused on security as, penetration testers are. So, when you're saying, yeah, your program is terrible from a security standpoint, well, that may be, but that's because, maybe the focus wasn't put there.
Yeah.
To begin with. So
yeah, and it's our job as penetration testers to kind of help close that gap. And so it's not just the devs fighting that fight, it's us on their team trying to explain to management why security is important. I think that's one of the biggest benefits of penetration testing in a lot of cases is getting more buy-in, getting better resources and funding for security efforts that need to be ongoing. So maybe as a dev, you can't make that argument, but as a third-party penetration tester, maybe I can help you make that argument because, I just gained access to all of the PII stored in a database from outside of your organization's network. And I can tell the CEO that that's going to cost you, $2 million in, response efforts and breach reporting and things like that, that might get their attention. And I can tell you from experience, a lot of times if I put a screenshot of everybody's salary in the company up on a report, redactive of course, but show them the kind of data that I have access to, you'll immediately get a little bit more buy-in. Their ears will perk up because you're putting it in terms they understand. They don't care that I used man in the middle 6 and cracked a weak password that I was able to use with, to gain access to a single workstation, and then I passed the hash over and gained access to the domain controller, whatever. They don't care. They care that I was on their network, I gained access to their crown jewels, and that's going to cost them money. So we can help your teams, we can help other teams of people deliver that news and help get some of that buy-in, hopefully, if their management is open to receiving that. So if you're still interested in being a penetration tester after all that, after those scare tactics, let's talk about some things that you can do to better break into the field. Preparation. How do you prepare to become a penetration tester? How do you prepare to get into the field? There's a couple skills that I think we've already kind of touched on. I want to talk about a few underlying pieces of those skills, but it comes down to your technical skills, your communication skills first and foremost. That's what's going to make you fit for the position and be comfortable in the position and be able to perform well in the position. Those are the two key aspects. But then there's that third piece of the puzzle that is important that you do have to consider, which is just your skills and how they look on paper, how you're going to bypass a hiring manager or the firewall, or just get the interview in the first place. And I think that's really a separate piece of this puzzle. And that's why I kind of broke it out here. You can't rely on only those skills on paper. You have to be able to talk the talk, but you do need to show that you belong in the room. And then nunchuck skills are important for everybody, of course.
I don't know, man. I think throwing stars are a better alternative for skills. I mean, range, come on, man.
Yeah, you can't let them get close.
Exactly.
Yeah. Both staff skills all the way.
Yeah. So I was a big fan of Michelangelo as a kid. So I just have a affinity to nunchucks.
Hands down the best turtle.
Oh, for sure the best turtle. He had a skateboard. Come on. Anyway, so technical skills come down to a couple broad areas. So first and foremost, and this is going to be one of those things that's, I don't think it's controversial, but people don't like to hear it a lot. You have to have a foundational understanding of technology. And, a lot of times this is going to manifest itself as the stupid, how does DNS work? Explain to me what happens when I type a website in a browser. That's how it's going to manifest, but you have to have that underlying familiarity with technology because you have to understand what you're doing from a tool perspective. The most dangerous kind of pen tester is the one that knows how to use tools but doesn't understand the technology. You don't know the situation or what you're doing. You can't explain what's going on to me, but you do know how to click that go button. You know how to load up Armitage and launch a Hail Mary. That scares me. So a lot of our focus is I can teach you a lot about hacking and the techniques if you have a security or technology background and you have a foundational understanding of technology. You know how a network works, and not necessarily the bits and bytes level, but just you can explain to me, like what is a switch? What is a router? Like how is this all going to go together? What's a DMZ? You have to be able to understand what an architecture of an organization might and should look like to really understand how to attack it. And that takes different forms depending on what kind of penetration testing you want to get in or what your background is. Matt and I talked the other day about that kind of big diagram I drew of what a website architecture might look like. And you have to understand what you might run into to understand what hurdles you might hit and how to get around those hurdles, right? So a website's a website, great. But if you're doing a web application penetration test, you've got to deal with potentially web application firewalls, load balancers. You've got a web server that should hopefully be in a DMZ. Maybe you have a middleware layer where there's like a business logic server that sits in between. Maybe you have a database server that's on the internal network, hopefully, that's separate. And when you're launching attacks, where are you going to land in that architecture? What do you have to bypass for those attacks to be successful? Not to mention differences in things like authentication with single sign-on, maybe differences in authentication with APIs or separate API servers. There's a lot going on in that potential architecture, and you don't have to know exactly what all that looks like, but you do need to understand what you could encounter. So that's really what I mean by a foundational understanding of technology and just being able to explain simple things like that. You're going to run into that. You're going to be, if I interview somebody and I feel like you don't understand something that you're talking about, then I might ask more questions about that. So if you just have that foundational understanding and you do research and you learn about these things, you're going to be in a much better place. Secondary to that is, of course, familiarity with hacking tools and techniques. So being able to tell me that you, have gotten flags on Hack the Box, that's important. But being able to explain to me what some of the flags associated with Nmap might be that you would run, I would argue that's probably more important. Being able to explain to me in what scenario you might run like Dirbuster, GoBuster, things like that. That's what we're looking for. I don't need to know exactly, the ins and outs of each tool and which flags you're going to use, but I want to know that you kind of know what's in your toolbox and when to break those tools out. And then we can figure out exactly how to put the pieces together over time. This is probably the most important part of these last two, though. So one of the things and one of the qualities that I look for in people is the ability to identify problems. So knowing when something's a problem, and not just like, I got remote code execution, this is a problem. You need to be able to identify when symptoms are in place that could lead to a problem too. So you have to be able to identify when a password policy is bad, maybe, or when a service exposed to the internet is bad. Even though you couldn't gain access to that service, why the heck do you have MySQL exposed to the internet? Things like that just kind of add up over time. And then not only identifying the problem, but we're useless unless we know what to prescribe as a fix for that problem. We're useless as penetration testers if we spike the football and show that we got remote code execution, but we have no idea how to go and fix that problem, because then we have taught them nothing. They don't know how to fix the problem. They don't know how to close that gap in security. And then again, last but not least at all, troubleshooting. So you have to be a great troubleshooter when it comes to any security job, I think, any technology job, but particularly for pen testing. So people that have experience in help desk, they usually do a great job at this. People that are application developers typically do a great job at this, diagnosing what a problem is, what's the cause, and how to fix it. And this comes in not only when you're running a test, but when you're using a tool, when you're scripting something out, all of those things play, and you have to be able to really adapt and understand that stuff. Quick story real quick, and one of my absolute favorites is I worked with a guy several years ago as a pen tester, and this guy had all kinds of credentials coming in the door, was very decorated supposedly as a penetration tester. And so I was working with him on a project really early on in his time there, and he, given all his credentials and given what he was talking and his level of experience, he said he had, basically was kind of light QA. I was kind of walking him through our process, but I wasn't really going into too much detail about training on specific tools and things like that. He seemed to have a handle on it. And so he started doing like an external penetration test for an organization, and was, working along on it. I checked in on him every couple hours. He was working. He said he was, having some trouble getting scans completed, but he was figuring it out and it's going okay. So then I come back 3 days later when the test is supposed to be over, and he had 0 findings. And I'm thinking to myself, like, oh, this is very strange, for a network of this size. How do you have 0 findings? And so I looked at all of his scans, and there were no ports that were showing as open. And I was like, man, these scans took a really long time to complete, and there's no ports open, but I know this customer is expecting things to be here. What's going on? And found out that he had been testing for 3 days without an internet connection. So he had, messed up something on his VM, screwed up the NIC or something, and did not have an internet connection, and just spent 3 days doing that. So you have to be able to think about things and troubleshoot and figure out why things aren't working and when things aren't working, to really be successful, or you're going to have problems. All right, looking at the soft skills. So communication skills, as we discussed, are critical. Being able to talk to a room full of people and explain a problem, it's critical. But it really starts with writing. It starts with writing a report. If you're not a strong writer and you struggle with that, that's something you definitely need to work on to get into penetration testing. You have to be able to clearly write both a technical report that explains problems and explains risk, as well as write an executive summary level report to explain those technical problems in a simpler way. This is something that a lot of organizations are now asking for as part of the interview process. So I know several pen testing companies ask for like either a report sample or ask you to do a technical test and find vulnerabilities and write up a report on it. So you're not going to be able to get away from your writing skills if it's not a strong suit. So really try and focus on that and try and hone those skills. And it really comes down to both the first line and the last line kind of go hand in hand. Attention to detail is critical, both on the technical side, but also on the reporting side. Being able to identify when you've misspelled something or when you're maybe not being accurate in how you describe something, that's very important. Speaking and presentation skills obviously goes without saying. You need to be able to present findings to customers, both technical audiences as well as non-technical audiences. And then day-to-day communication. So as hackers, as computer geeks, whatever you want to call us, I mean, people that just have kind of grown up in a technical age and embrace technology from that perspective, you really have to be good at day-to-day communications, and you have to be human and be able to send emails to people, be able to talk in work Slack and things like that. You can't isolate yourself and expect to be on a successful penetration testing team because there's so much teamwork that's involved. Any questions there? Anything to add?
Hey, JR, this is, oh no, go ahead, man.
Well, I was just going to add that, a lot of people, when they want to get into pen testing, they're looking for a fully remote job as their first pen testing gig. And that's all good and well, but I, can speak from experience how being in the office is just so crucial when you're first learning and trying to understand key concepts where you're not going to get that same interaction over Slack. And so while I know a lot of people want to get that remote job, I would urge people to try to find something that is accessible to them, to get into an office, sit right next to someone, be able to take those notes, because that you'll learn so much quicker and so much better. So that I know a lot of people, like, again, try to get away from like the in-person stuff and that commute, but it's invaluable. So if you can get that job where you're sitting next to someone who knows what they're talking about, you really should go ahead and do that.
Yeah, I would 100% agree with that. And that's really one of our focuses too. And, as Matt's kind of alluding to, we try and keep a hybrid remote and in-office work environment. And we'll focus more on being in the office on regular intervals when we're training a lot more often, because of how valuable it is to kind of be able to see firsthand how to work with somebody, how to sit face to face with them and explain a topic or draw on a whiteboard and make sure everybody's on the same page with how to perform certain pieces of testing. So I would 100% agree with that. And if you can find something that is hybrid out of a pen testing position where you have the ability to go into an office, where you have the ability to talk with people and train, I really do think that's invaluable, because I know me personally, it's very difficult for me to train remotely. To be on a conference call for hours at a time, to be screen sharing as opposed to just, over the shoulder, or say, hey, let me type this out, or whatever that looks like. I think there's a lot of elements of that that have a lot of value.
And I also want to add one more thing. I know that in this field and generally in technology, we tend to kind of deify people who are really, really good at shit and can do things pretty much by themselves. Very much the Elliot Alderson, Mr. Robot kind of guy. But no man is an island, and really cannot stress enough just how important teamwork is. As an example, when Matt and I were working, I very much remember he was shadowing me on an internal, and I had a deliverable to go to like within 5 minutes, and I was kind of bashing my head against this thing, and I brought him and somebody else to watch me do the internal, and they got together, and they actually found a solution that ended up getting us domain administrator. And mind you, these are brand new guys who ended up doing all the heavy lifting for me because they just got together, they hashed it out, they found something, and they kicked all the ass. And I just sat there flabbergasted because I got showed up with the new guys. So it was awesome because it goes to show that teamwork is really, really important. And it also goes to say that goes to what you said earlier about if you're in a deliverable and you blank out, sometimes you can give that meaningful look to your to your buddy, and all of a sudden they're like, hey, I got you. All right.
Oh yeah. Yeah, that's 100%. And I'll add to that, not only when we're training, but in the office, I mean, there's a lot of times where I'll look over to one of our other pen testers and be like, hey, I know you're better at this than I am. Can you either help me or jog my memory here? What's going on? Everybody has their own specialties. And while, sure, we can all do the same types of testing, I'm not going to say I'm just as good at one type of testing as somebody else. My background as a dev makes me much more comfortable doing web application penetration testing, API penetration testing, mobile apps, things like that, than network layer penetration testing. Now, I've obviously focused a lot on network layer, and that's something that I have to do on a daily basis, but it's still not necessarily my specialty or my focus. So if I have a networking issue where I'm running into problems with networking or with, LAN traffic or something like that, or if I'm trying to use a tool that I'm maybe not as familiar with on an internal pen, trying to get C2 working or something like that, I will definitely bring somebody else in. And there's no shame in that. And in fact, that's another good reason to have people in the office so you can get quick answers, you can keep momentum, and you can kind of have that collaborative environment. Or if something's really cool and I'm really, really close to getting RCE on a system, for example, and I just can't get the exploit working, gather people around, use that hive mind to try and push through those barriers.
Hey, what's up, guys?
Question?
This is Joe. I don't know why it says Tweeter. That's not my Discord name or anything. It's just a dumb college nickname that's stuck for life. Appreciate all this stuff, and honestly, just kind of wanted to go back to the public speaking. I mean, that's not abnormal for security professionals or anything. When I was teaching, I used to tell my students at the beginning of the year, you might learn a bunch of stuff that you're going to get tested on at the end of the year, but probably the most important thing that you're going to learn for me this year is how to speak in front of people. And so every month we would just have stupid projects, or whatever, because I would tell them the number one fear in America is public speaking, and number 7 is death. And that just kind of goes to show you that that's a common thing. So don't want any of you guys to feel like, like that's an abnormal thing. It's probably more common, but I've been actually trying to find some resources, cheap, really accessible things that give you quick hit tips and things like that. I'll try to upload those into the page because I've actually talked to a few people that have taken some courses on that. Somebody mentioned the improv thing. I think I saw a clip of Tina Fey being on at RSA, and it was all about improv and security. And I thought that was a pretty cool connection. And my main question, though, for you was the kind of going back to the OSCP training. Like, that's not a topic I've ever talked about. Is there any, I know there's a lot of focus on the reporting, but is there any discussion throughout their training program that actually focuses on the vocal part of it and presenting that?
No, I don't think so. And somebody else feel free to chime in if I'm wrong. It's been a little while since I've gone through that, but no, I don't think it really focuses on that. And even the reporting is kind of just overblown. I mean, you do have to write a report, but they're not critiquing your report format. Let's be clear. So, if you got shells and you got flags, you're probably good to go. So I think that is definitely a gap. And I've heard people talk about things like, I don't know, like Toastmasters is one of those big ones from people that I knew in the military. Not me personally being in the military, but working in a military environment, I knew a lot of people were really, hyping up Toastmasters. I don't know that that's really an accessible solution. For me, I think a lot of maybe classes and tips and things like that, but the more you do it, the more comfortable you're going to be. And so even little things, like one of the things that I tried to get better at and try to still actively work on today, if you're in a class or a presentation or just talking with people and you have a question or you have some feedback, try and just raise your hand and have that interaction. So even if you're not the speaker, you're practicing your public speaking skills in that kind of improvised environment. I know, like me personally, like it's deadly frightening to raise your hand in the middle of a big crowd and ask a question of a speaker. I would probably rather get up and give the talk itself rather than do that part. But little things like that in your everyday lives can help you be a better public speaker. Talking to your friends when you're out at the bar, being able to carry on a conversation and kind of get that back and forth. Not so much, waiting your turn to speak, but listening, analyzing, responding. Those kind of skills translate to when you're giving a talk or when you are presenting to a client.
Yeah, and I just wanted to add in there, we're in the perfect venue to work on that, Queen City Skitties. We're all learning, we're all students, forever students. So, nobody has to feel like there's any judgment at all whenever giving a talk. It doesn't matter how, advanced or high level it is or whatever. If you can give a talk, you absolutely should, because someone's going to learn something new. Even if they've been in the game for 10 plus years, they might learn something new. The person who's just joining for the first time is definitely going to learn something new. And I think it's a great resource, this meetup, to learn and grow on your public speaking skills, gaining that confidence, and also just having fun with it. Because I mean, everyone that's in here right now has been on, in one of these meetups like multiple times, and we're all familiar with each other. So there's, never any kind of judgment. And it's all just about having fun. And that's what kind of sucks right now, is it's not that in-person thing where we're all kind of just hanging out, but we're still having fun with it. You can still grab a drink, have a good time. So if you are worried about public speaking, do a talk here. It doesn't matter what it is, just talk, have some fun. We're all here to help each other out.
Yep, it's a great point. And if it's not security related, anything that is passion project or something you're passionate about is usually easier to speak about than something new. Or you can research a new topic, and I guarantee by putting a talk together and getting ready to speak about it, you'll learn something. So all that plays.
It's a great point, man. It doesn't have to be security related in here. Like if you want to present on why Michael Jordan is better than LeBron James, it's a great opportunity. There's so much to talk about. It's obviously Jordan's better. So
you can start a discussion, because there's no way Jordan's better. So they'll start kind of back and forth.
No, that definitely worked though. I just kind of go back to the students. I remember I had topics early on and the kids were like nervous because they weren't sure if they were right. And so that just got in their head. Once I said, hey, present on whatever you want, and we're going to practice different formats, you just started to see kind of improvements, more comfort levels. So pretty cool idea actually to even consider that doing here, just on anything you want. Just 5-minute presentation, give yourself a little practice.
Yeah. And then as you level up and start to do those presentations more, one of the things that we do internally a lot is like the torments, as you were mentioning, like kind of the hecklers. So we'll ask somebody to give a section of a presentation to practice. And then as we do it, we're emulating a bad customer or a customer that we've encountered in the past, and throwing questions, either ridiculous questions or hard questions or being controversial, something like that, into the presentation to help with your improvisation and how you handle it. All right, so I think we're coming up on 2:00 here. So I think that should be my time, right, Matt?
Well, the other speaker here is the other Matt. So
Okay.
I guess that's up to him. I think you could probably keep going. I don't know if he's on a time crunch.
Okay.
No, I'm
fine.
good, man. You guys can take as long as you need. It's fine.
Cool.
Okay, I don't have too much left. I just didn't want to run in and create a backup here. So I'll go quickly. There's really not too much left to cover. Like I said, I just kind of threw these slides together. So just my thoughts this morning. And then the last thing here is so putting all that stuff that we just talked about aside, all the stuff that we just talked about is the important stuff, I'd say. But you have to get to the table. And so to get to the table in the first place, you have to have demonstrable skills on paper. And different hiring managers, different organizations are going to look at these skills differently. So they're not created equal for every single job you're going to apply for. Certain jobs are just not going to be a good fit that you apply for. And so, when you get filtered out through that HR firewall, don't take that personally. Maybe they have experiences, or maybe they have something that, makes some of these things more important to them. From my experience, I put a fairly high amount of importance on degrees still. Not so much that I care where or what the degree is in. It doesn't need to be technical, but it does show me that you can stick with a program. You have some level of writing, some level of speaking. It helps give me a baseline of your understanding. And so I know you know how to communicate through, email, things like that to some level. So I still put a fairly high degree of importance on that. Not all organizations are going to be like that. And I know not everybody is going to agree with that. And not everybody does have a degree that's great at what they do. So it's certainly not the end all be all. But in my mind, it does have a little bit of weight. So that's going to be different across the board. And that goes for all these things. Certifications. I personally enjoy getting certifications. I think I learn a lot. I think it gives me something at the end of it that I can, kind of showcase what I've learned through that. But it's not the end all be all. And so I'm not looking for any one certification. I'm not looking, oh, this guy doesn't have OSCP, so no thanks, he's out the door. But all this stuff is also important because as a pen tester, as a security consultant, we have to market you to clients. Nobody wants a pen tester with no experience, no degrees, no certifications, because how am I going to put that bio in front of a customer? So you have to not only think about how it's going to prepare you, but you have to think about how to market yourself as well to people that are not necessarily familiar with the security industry. They may only know what a CISP is, for example. But as an employer, I have to think about that. Same thing goes with like publications. So if you have a blog, that helps because it shows me immediately whether you know how to write and communicate. I can either go get a really good impression or a bad impression from that blog. If you have talks you've given, I can see your level of communication, again, both written and verbal. So I can go look at those recordings and I can see kind of how you present yourself. Same thing with publications and CVEs. It doesn't really, it's not the end all be all, but it helps kind of show your technical knowledge and where your areas of focus have been previously. Hiring managers, and this is going to vary again. So this is not necessarily the HR firewall, but for like, pen test leads and stuff that are hiring for their team. A lot of them really like to see the conference attendance and community involvement, the passion projects. So I know I certainly like to see these things. I like to see that you're plugged into the community, that you're going to QCS meetups, that you're going to B-Sides and CarolinaCon, and you're plugged into these things. And not necessarily that you're doing any one particular thing or that you can recant the talks that you saw there or whatever, but just the fact that you are aware that these things are going on and you're involved in the security community. And not just the security community, but any part of your local community, volunteering. As an organization, we try and spend at least a certain percentage of our time during the year volunteering, doing projects for 501c3s for nonprofits. So doing security projects for them, and then just straight up donations and supporting things like Big Brothers, Big Sisters, Boys and Girls Clubs, things like that. So, for us, that's a big thing as well. So any way that you can show that you're getting involved in the community, that you're supporting that community involvement always helps. And then of course, passion projects. So what's your GitHub link if you've got actually good code on there? What tools have you developed? What techniques have you developed? And again, this isn't the end all be all, but everything helps when you're trying to get in front and get that interview. And then you can really showcase your knowledge. So the last part of this that I want to talk about is just interviewing and just some things to consider, some faux pas that we've run into that you might want to avoid. This is probably the only meme that actually made me laugh out loud as I was putting it in this presentation this morning. People always ask, like, so why do you want to work here? Why are you interested? And it just seems like the silliest question to me. But so this is kind of the boss fight, right? You're preparing. Everything you've done up to this point is like a 1 hour time slot where you have to showcase your skills and to get them to like you at the very end of the day. It's to get whoever's interviewing you to like you and to give you a shot. So you want to be prepared for that. And as part of that, there's a couple things that we've run into, and there's varying Every organization is going to be different. Again, your mileage may vary here, but for the most part, when you walk into an interview, first and foremost, your first impression is you want to be dressed professionally. Don't dress like a hacker. I know you're going for a penetration testing job and everybody wants to wear the hoodie and sunglasses as some kind of funny gag. I guarantee you that it's just overplayed. Like that's not going to be you're not going to be successful in that. So don't show up in a t-shirt and jeans. Dress professionally, dress nicely, because again, we are penetration testers, but we have to be consultants as well. We have to be able to get up in front of a client and talk and be presentable. Also, when you're there, try not to be too uptight and nervous. I don't want to say like be relaxed and be, kind of goofy, because that's the other direction. You want to be somewhere in the middle where you want to be yourself, you want to be honest, but you want to be on your game. You want to be professional and show that you can have this interaction, because this is going to be the same kind of interaction you have with a client. So as much of the interview process is about technical as it is about soft skills and how you handle yourself. How do you handle the pressure? If you show me that you can speak well, handle pressure, and that you're a smart guy, I'm very likely going to overlook a lot of other shortcomings or a lot of things that I haven't, that I don't necessarily know or couldn't get an answer to. So that's going to be what you rely on here. If you don't know something, don't try and bullshit your way out of it. That is the biggest turnoff for me personally as a hiring person, as a hiring manager. I hate it when somebody tries to act like they know something when they really don't, and I can tell for a fact they don't. So if you mess something up or if you get something confused, that's totally different. I'm talking about just legitimately trying to BS your way through a conversation. I don't care if you don't know something I ask you about. If I ask you, have you ever used Man in the Middle 6? I don't care what the answer is. I'm asking for to understand A, what's your baseline of technical knowledge, because that does matter a little bit, but B, what are you going to do next? How are you going to fix that gap in your knowledge? If you can't explain the way DNS works to me, okay, that's one thing, but what are you going to do next? How are you going to answer that question going forward? I'm going to, first of all, I'm going to do some research. I've got a couple places, a couple of sources that I could go look up and try and figure out the gaps in my knowledge. So like I know DNS, when you initially resolve it, it might look at the computer host file, and then it will look to a DNS server to resolve the name and get the IP address. But I don't really know what happens in that third phase. I can go look that up though. That tells me a lot more about where you're at technically than just saying like trying to BS your way through it and getting it wrong. That all kind of rolls into whatever you do during the interview. Just don't over exaggerate. Don't lie. Don't say that you've done stuff you haven't really done, because if you get asked about it, then that's going to be an immediate disqualification, in my opinion. If you put something on your resume and I read it and I digest that and I take interest in that, and then I go ask you about it and you can't answer the questions, then that's a really bad look. And then to just kind of round it out here, so what can you do to help ease that process? So simple things. Practice explaining your background experience. And I don't mean, recite it in front of the mirror word for word. I mean, I have a horrible memory. So I don't remember a lot of things about my own life. And so people are like, always get cracked up by this, that I can, remember the definition of some obscure InfoSec term, but I can't remember what exactly I did in my job, 10 years ago. So I have to like actively go back and review what projects I worked on, jog my memory, and think about what valuable skills I pulled from those projects. And so by going back and just reviewing your background experience, making some bullet points, some notes for things you want to hit on, it'll help smooth that process out where somebody inevitably asks you, hey, so tell me a little bit about yourself. That way you don't skip over really important things that you want to focus on. Additionally, practice explaining core concepts and tools that you're familiar with. Again, you don't have to get down to the nitty gritty. You don't have to go down to like, flags and things like that, but you want to be comfortable explaining technologies. You want to be comfortable explaining tools that you could potentially use. If I asked you, okay, here's a web application to conduct a test on. Talk me through your methodology. What do you do? What are your steps now? You should have a reasonable answer for that. It doesn't have to be perfect, and it doesn't have to address every single web app that's out there, but you should have some way of walking through that process. So those are some things that you could prepare for. There are entire GitHubs that are lists of interview questions specifically for InfoSec jobs. So run through those, see if you have answers for them. The ones that you don't, consider looking them up, coming up with answers. And then silly enough, but just prepare questions for interviewers. I know anybody that's doing a job interview will tell you this. I know technical recruiters will try and tell you this and coach you through this, but it is helpful to have some idea of what you're interested in about the job. So what I mean by this is asking things like, how do you handle training, or how do you prevent knowledge loss from employee turnover? I don't know, silly stuff like that, but just showing some interest in how they conduct their processes and things that could be meaningful and important to you. That does a lot to show your mindset from an interviewer's perspective. And then last but not least, show that you're passionate. This, more so than any other job, penetration testing to me is a passion project. It's a job that you have to love. And if you don't, you're going to get burnt out. You're not going to be successful if you're not passionate about learning, if you're not passionate about kind of these core concepts of penetration testing, critical thinking, solving puzzles. If you're not passionate about stuff like that, it's going to be a really tough career transition for you. Okay, that's all I've got. Anything to add to this, or any other questions about that kind of process, or anything maybe I didn't cover that anybody's curious about?
No, That was pretty thorough.
Oh, sorry. I have one question, but it's kind of unrelated to this presentation, but I understand that web app is your niche. So do you have any go-to resources for web apps that you really like to use a lot? I mean, besides like Burp Suite Academy, maybe that one I use the most, but do you have any ones that you prefer?
So there's really not great stuff out there, and I'll tell you why. So web application penetration testing is unique in that there are so many different kinds of applications that you're going to run into. It is the most difficult to scope out as a penetration testing organization. It's the most difficult to get a level of effort idea for as far as how testing is going to go. And once you get into testing, you have no idea what you're walking into in most cases. As far as technologies go, as far as infrastructure goes, architecture, design, all of those things can be so massively different for a web app. My background is in .NET applications with C# business code, MS SQL backends, just a normal traditional application. But there's so much more to that now. Single page applications, basically things like AngularJS and Vue.js that are fully dependent on API. All of those things make it so difficult to kind of train for web app testing and learn how to do it unless you have some experience doing it. So with that being said, I would say the most, the resources I rely on mostly are OWASP, OWASP methodologies, OWASP checklists, OWASP cheat sheets. That stuff is really invaluable just to cover a lot of bases in a general way. So that for the most part will apply across many different types of applications. But then below that, you really have to get familiar with architecture and types of languages and technologies that you could run into. And I would say that that's a little bit more difficult. Hack the Box, Try Hack Me, a lot of these ranges will have different types of web apps if you want to focus on those areas. But as far as like a single source of information, it's a big gap, I think, right now in that area of penetration testing.
Yeah, I fully understand what you're saying. Thank you. I have one more question. Have you done a lot of like white box pen testing ever since you got OSWE?
I have not. I've done maybe 3 over the past 5 years. It's not very common, and I'll tell you why. Mainly, it's a resource issue. So only very large, mature organizations that have a large security budget are going to tend to go for that type of testing because it takes a lot of time to manually review code and to do that as part of a web application penetration test. Most people don't see the value for the dollar amount. Now, the OSWE certainly does give you a lot of skills in that area, so I did learn a lot there. The difficulty also with white box penetration testing is that you have to be comfortable reviewing whatever kind of code you're going to get. And given the different types of code and different types of infrastructures that are out there, I've done white box code reviews of PHP applications because I'm fairly comfortable with that language and understand how to statically analyze it. But I would not be comfortable analyzing a lot of other languages. So I might shy away from even accepting a project like that. If that makes sense.
Oh, I understand. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Yeah, no worries. All right. Well, I'm gonna back out of this